What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video. In this one, it's the Game Week 21 preview. So thanks, as always, for sending your questions in. We're going to jump into it by talking about Arsenal and Brighton. So would you prioritise a Brighton or Arsenal midfielder? Who is your singular pick out of the bunch? Now, I think this one's pretty simple. If you're not already tripled up on Arsenal, that is what you should be looking to do. Yes, they've got a difficult enough fixture this week with Man United at home. But one, it's a home game, so that will help. And also, as we saw last night, Casemiro will be suspended for Man United, so that will help Arsenal quite a bit. But also, they've got a double game week guaranteed in game week 23, and they're going to play in game week 25 as well. You can't say that about Brighton. They will have double game weeks in the future, but it's not one that we know about just yet, and they might blank in game week 25. So although Matoma and March at 5 and 5.1 million are great value, it's not like Arsenal midfielders are super expensive. So that is what I would look at first of all. Saka, for me, is still the number one choice, even though he's not the highest scoring midfielder for Arsenal right now. That is, of course, Odegaard. His minutes are guaranteed, and he's also their penalty taker. Next up, I would go for Odegaard. So if you're looking to double up on the midfield, they are the two that I would go for. I don't think anyone else in that squad is going to affect his minutes that much. And obviously, he's got good underlying stats, and he's just playing really well right now. Thirdly, I would go for Martinelli, because he's really the only other option. It is worth noting that just before I started recording this video, a tweet went out from Fabrizio Romano saying that Arsenal are in for Trossard. Now, the good thing about Trossard is he would add a lot of squad depth to that Arsenal side because he can pretty much play anywhere across that attack. But I think the most likely minutes he would take off anyone that's been in the squad for a while is Martinelli on the left. He could possibly play up front instead of Nketiah. I just think there's a lot less chance of him coming in for Odegaard or Saka. So if you're starting kind of fresh and you're not like someone like me that's already got Saka and Martinelli, Saka first and then Odegaard is probably where I would go. It's not to say the Brighton players are bad picks, but I think if you're making a transfer this week, you've got to prioritise Arsenal. Okay, so let's talk about the Man City headache. Now, I am recording this on Thursday morning, and they do play their second game of double game week 20 against Spurs tonight. But unless there's any injuries, I don't think the answer to this question is going to change. So who are the best replacements for Phil Foden? Do we stick with two Man City attackers by getting Mahrez, for example, or make money available for De Bruyne, or do we just stick to Haaland only? Now, we can forget about game week 20 because that is gone. So looking ahead, they've got a guaranteed double in game week 23, and they also play in game week 25. And obviously, they're one of the best sides in the league, which is why we're always looking to target them. But as I said last week, unless you can guarantee that the player you bring in from Man City has got a good chance of playing all the games, then they don't have any extra fixtures, right? So someone like Ederson, for example, very boring, and I get that. You know he has an extra fixture in 23 because he is nailed on to start all those games. And a similar situation to Haaland and De Bruyne. You do expect them to play the majority of games, if not all of them. But anyone else, if they miss a single game, then they've got exactly the same number of fixtures as a player who is nailed on but doesn't have a double game week. So I just don't think it's worth moving Phil Foden to Mahrez because, yes, Mahrez started against Man United and he may start against Spurs, but how much can you guarantee that going forward? So it probably depends on which other midfielders you don't have yet. But obviously, coming off the back of the question we just talked about, if you don't already have two Arsenal midfielders and you've got a spare slot, well, they've got a double game week in 23. And if it's Saka or Odegaard, you can pretty much guarantee their minutes. And even with Martinelli, I wouldn't start worrying about him, not starting anytime soon. So they are obvious picks. Man United do have the potential for a double in 22. And someone like Fernandes, for example, is nailed on for 90 minutes pretty much every week. But I don't know if I would go there just yet without knowing that double is guaranteed. But that is what I would be thinking about. And I'm not saying that, panicking and just selling Foden to someone else is worth it. Because if he starts against Spurs, that's two starts in a row. Maybe you just keep hold of him. I just don't think it's worth going sideways. So it's the same answer as last week. Ederson, De Bruyne and Haaland are really the only three players that we can say with some degree of certainty, even not 100% certainty, but some, that they will play every game. Outside of that, who knows? Grealish, Foden, Mahrez, they're all options. Obviously, if someone got injured, then it's a different question, right? Because then we can maybe expect a player to get more minutes. But right now, I just do not think it's worth the headache. So if you want a Man City player and you've got Foden, I would probably just hold on to him. If not, you sell to De Bruyne or you sell outside of Man City, in my opinion. So what are my thoughts on bringing in Trent Alexander-Arnold? I know a lot of people would just write him off as an option straight away, and I get it. He's 7 odd million. Liverpool aren't playing that well right now, and they're not keeping a huge amount of clean sheets either. So it's not a massive amount to get excited about. On the flip side, I don't think he's a completely awful option to look at, simply because there's not a huge amount of defenders right now. So a lot of people have got Trippier, maybe an Arsenal defender, and then a Man United defender, usually Luke Shaw. And you could go and double up on the Newcastle defence. There's lots of value players there, but also you've got to consider that they might blank in game week 25. And unless you're on a 3 premium attacker setup, there probably is quite a bit of money to go around. Now, from an attacking point of view, Trent Alexander-Arnold's numbers are down on last year, but 1, we know what he's capable of, and 2, those numbers that are lower than last year are still better than most other defenders that we could look to bring into our team. So from an attacking point of view, I'm not too worried. It's just whether or not they will get enough clean sheets and whether that money will block you from doing something else instead. It's worth noting that Van Dijk is obviously injured at the moment. He might be back for the game in game week 22. We'll have to wait and see what Klopp says about that. So that would obviously help. I think looking at the fixtures where I could possibly see clean sheets, I'm not sure about one against Chelsea, but they haven't been scoring a huge amount of goals. So it's a possibility. Then you've got Wolves away. I think that's a good chance. Everton's a good chance. Newcastle is tough. Palace away, possibly. I know Man United conceded last night away to Palace, but that was a cracking free kick, right? It was absolutely brilliant. Outside of that, Palace didn't get a huge amount of chances. Man United at home will be tough. Then Bournemouth and Fulham is okay. So I think from like game weeks 21 to 28, there's a few chances at clean sheets there. There is also an outside chance that they will get a double game week, depending on what happens with the FA Cup fixtures and stuff like that. And if they do, I know everyone's writing off Trent right now, but if they do get a double, you will start thinking about him. So there's a few things to consider. I think the midfield is an issue, but I guess the team they've got there and the manager they've got, you would expect that it's more likely that they turn it around than that they don't. So he could be an option. For me, it just comes down to what does he block. Like, if you look at my team, let's say instead of Fernandes, I've got a Brighton midfielder who everyone loves right now, right? So if you saw Mitoma in there, you wouldn't say that was a bad pick. So if I did Fernandes to Mitoma, I've got like, what, 4 million or 4.5 million to spend, something like that. So if I had if I had Trent instead of Ake, would that make my team awful if everything else stayed the same? All those Arsenal players everyone loves, Trippier, Edison, okay, maybe a cheaper goalkeeper is better, but at the end of the day, he's playing for a great defence. We'll talk about Salah later. Haaland, Mitrovic are fine. So if I had Mitoma and Trent instead of Ake or Fernandes, if Man United don't get a double in 22, does that seem okay? It probably is okay. So I don't think right now for most teams, Trent blocks you from doing anything you might want to do. I guess it all just then comes down to each individual FPL manager, that if you get Trent in and then you want that money later on for a different move, that is what you need to think about, because then it costs extra transfers to move the funds around. So the summary is, I don't mind it, but every time I watch Liverpool right now, I feel like they're going to concede, and that is not great. So the only reason I'd even think about it is because there is a lack of other options. There's someone who's sitting there with Ake. Whether or not he starts against Spurs, I'm going to be worried about whether he starts against Wolves. Then I'm going to be worried in the next game, etc. So having someone like Trent instead, who you know is going to play every week, and is good from an attacking perspective, I don't completely hate it, even though I know that everyone else will. So for managers with 2 free transfers, is it worth bringing in Man United players early with a potential double in game week 22? Now, if they do double in 22, it'll be Crystal Palace at home and then one of Leeds at home or Brentford at home. So it would look pretty good. And the people that are much cleverer than me in terms of figuring out all this fixture stuff, like Ben Crellin on Twitter, James from Planet FPL as well, they seem to think that it's more likely they will double in 22 than it is for it to not happen. It's not guaranteed, but there is a good chance that it could happen, right? So it's worth looking at Man United players. I think the issue is they're playing Arsenal away, so I don't think you can really justify, unless you've got nothing else to do with 2 free transfers, which could be the case, it's hard to justify bringing in a defender, because obviously they are likely to concede. I think the only defender I would look at is Luke Shaw. He can play centre-back, which we've seen a lot of times, and he is the first choice left-back as well, and he does offer the most attacking threat out of most of the Man United defenders. So he's the one that I would look at. I guess you could potentially look at David De Gea if you wanted to change one of your goalkeepers. But outside of that, I think Rashford and Fernandes are really the only two players that we can look at right now. I think there's a chance against Arsenal they might go for a similar setup as against Man City, which means that Antony might not play. They might put Fernandes on that right side and play. Obviously, Casemiro is suspended, so it could be Fred, McTominay and Eriksen as the midfield. I think that is a possibility. So I wouldn't probably go for Antony just because of minutes. Garnacho is the same. He's not guaranteed to start. We saw Weghorst start last night. Martial wasn't even in the squad. I don't know if he was mentioned by Ten Hag. I haven't seen anything, but presumably he's injured again. So I think it's very hard to justify bringing him in. So your question might be, okay, so should I go for Weghorst? But the problem is Martial is probably still first choice. So when he is fit, he may play instead. So minutes-wise, you just can't really get it. So it has to be Fernandes. You could look at Eriksen. He got an assist last night. Really, and to be honest, Eriksen was just great last night. And he's a bit cheaper, but he just doesn't necessarily get as far advanced as someone like Fernandes. But he is a lot less money. So if you really couldn't afford Fernandes and you wanted to go for a triple up, then Eriksen probably is the next best option. But if you can get the money, the three on screen are the ones to go for. Luke Shaw, Rashford, Fernandes. If you can, I would probably just avoid bringing them in against Arsenal if there's another transfer you can make instead. And at least then by game week 22, you'll know whether they've got a double, and then you can consider bringing them in. But obviously, you also need to remember, for anyone that's thinking about doing it, that they might blank in game week 25 if they get to the Carabao Cup final. And again, you would have that information by game week 22 because both the Carabao Cup fixtures would have been played. So I look at the Man United fixtures and think, yeah, they could get something against Palace at home. Yeah, there's a double possibly. Leeds away is good. Leicester at home is good. Brentford at home, if they play in 25, is good as well. So in general, I think the fixtures are pretty good. Obviously, I've just said good a lot of times. But if you can wait, I would try and wait till game week 22 because you'll know whether there's a chance the 25 fixture is off and you'll know whether there's definitely a double. And then you can decide whether or not you want to kind of spend the money on Fernandes or just maybe go with Rashford and Shaw only. So I know it feels like game week 25 is ages away, but it is going to play a part in how you make your transfers over the next few weeks. And I feel like that's what this question is kind of getting at. So with Andreas definitely playing in game week 25, how important is it keeping a 3-4-3 formation rather than 3-5-2 with Greenwood? So there's a few things to consider. Number one, there are still points to be gained before game week 25. So you don't necessarily want to make loads of bad transfers just to have Andreas Pereira play in 25. Because most of the time he's going to sit on your bench anyway. Of course, the ideal situation is best of both worlds. You bring in a player that is just good anyway and plays in game week 25. Like obviously the Arsenal players I've mentioned quite a bit. So consider that. You also need to look at how many players you're actually going to have missing potentially and how many transfers you've got to deal with all those issues. So if I look at my team, for example, this is how I'm set up for game week 21. So if I'm thinking ahead to game week 25, the players that are likely to miss out would be my Man United players, where I've got 3, and Trippier as well. And obviously I've got Greenwood on the bench. So I could potentially bench Trippier. I could bench one of my Man United players as well, probably Rashford, because obviously he's been great. And then I've got then I'd be playing a 4-4-2. So I'm thinking about what else do I have to deal with. So I've got one transfer in game week 21, another in 22, 23, 24, 25. So I've got 5 transfers to deal with this. I've got Fernandes and Luke Shaw, who I'd have to move on. I've also got Patterson, who's injured, might not be back. And Ake, who knows? He might lose his place in the next game because that is just Man City. So I've got 5 transfers and potentially 4 to deal with. But that's kind of okay because Fernandes gives me a lot of money to spend elsewhere. He wasn't necessarily a long-term pick anyway. And I think I can probably get through game week 25 without worrying about whether I've got Greenwood. So actually look at your team and think about how many issues you've got to deal with, but also how many other players you want to bring in. Because I look at my team and I don't think there's too many players that I'm missing that I desperately need right now. So I'm not too concerned about being on a 3-5-2. What I would say, and I'm guessing here, is that some people are probably thinking about going from a 3-4-3 to a 3-5-2, and obviously they are worried about getting rid of Andreas, who is a really good bench option. Few things I would say. Yes, I agree right now, there's not a huge amount of forwards to go for. I think the only ones I would be looking at are Kane, and I'm kind of happy with Salah for now, maybe De Bruyne later on. So Kane, Nunez if he's fit, Mitrovic because he's just nailed on to play every single week, and obviously Tony as long as he doesn't get suspended or anything like that. Outside of that, I don't see a huge amount of options. I know people were saying Ketia, really good option, but obviously you can get Arsenal defenders and Arsenal midfielders as well. That could change very quickly. In a few weeks' time, we might wish we had more than 3 forward spots because that's just FPL. So that's one thing. But also, you don't have to go for Greenwood. Yes, he's very cheap, but there are other cheap players you could now go for, right? So I spoke about my team selection, how I might go for Mitoma at some point, but he would just be a 5 million bench option most weeks. You could do that up front as well. So Leeds have got Gnonto. He's only 5 million, so he's 0.8 million more than Greenwood. I don't like he's had 90 minutes against Villa, 90 minutes against West Ham, 69 minutes against Newcastle, 90 against Man City. That's his last 4 games. Scored last night as well in the cup competition. And Leeds fans just don't think he's going to be missing out anytime soon. Also, he's got really good fixtures, and he would play in Gameweek 25 against Southampton. So as a person that's on 3-5-2, he is someone that I'm considering getting in. I do think that Leeds have got a lot of forward options, so there is a chance his minutes could be reduced. He might get benched at some point, but he's playing so well right now, I'm not sure whether that will happen anytime soon. So if he can keep it up, he could be a good option. So he's one player to look at, where it doesn't mean being on 3-5-2 is bad because you've got a player in Game Week 25. The other player who's playing a lot right now is Ferguson. Welbeck was injured, so that worries me a little bit. But again, Brighton are playing so well. Will De Zerbi look to change that? Because Ferguson has been decent, and he's only 4.5 million. The issue is, of course, if you've been listening along and know what could happen in 25, there is a chance, obviously, he doesn't play. But you could delay making that move until you know for sure. Because even if Brighton don't play Newcastle away, one of their other fixtures could go into that week instead. And again, we might know more about that by the time we get to Game Week 22. So he would basically be the same price as Andreas. He would hopefully play in 25 and let you stay on 3-5-2. So to come back to the question, it's important, but points are also important, and you might be able to do better by switching formation if you want to. And ultimately, Gnonto at 5 million is no different to having March or Mitoma on the bench for 5 million. And as long as he keeps his place, then he's a good option to call upon when you need him, and most weeks you're going to bench him anyway. So it's important, but it's not the be-all and end-all. So it literally could have been me writing this question to myself, couldn't it? I've been holding Salah all season. Is it finally time to let him go? And yeah, sure, if you think Salah is the biggest issue in your squad and you're not going to captain him anyway, you think he's too much money, you want to spend those funds elsewhere, or you want to transfer him to De Bruyne or something like that, you've got 2 free transfers, you want to go for Kane and have a good bench option like Mitoma in midfield instead, they are all reasons why you could definitely sell Salah, and there's no issue with that whatsoever. As you probably already know, I'm not going to sell him. One is because I just don't really want to use a transfer this week. I also don't think that Chelsea, like Liverpool haven't been great, neither have Chelsea. There's every chance that Salah could score in that game. But also, we have such high expectations of Salah, and to be fair, he's the most expensive player in the game, so we should hope that he scores more points, but it's not like he's having a truly, truly awful season. And like, if you think about the way people talk about De Bruyne, I've said this for a while now, the way they talk about De Bruyne is if he's amazing and he's been brilliant all season and he's playing great and we should have him in our teams, and he does have a double game week, so there's extra reason to go for him right now. Then they talk about Salah, awful, just absolutely awful, not worth the money. But then you look at the actual points, De Bruyne is on 101 at 12.5 million, and Salah is on 100, so 1 point behind, on 12.8 million. Okay, so there's not too much difference between them, but the way they are talked about is just completely different. So again, if you want to sell Salah, you absolutely can, but I kind of look at it thinking, we all just think that Salah has been dreadful, and yet he's almost at the top of the midfield scorers for the whole season. Yet we think that Almiron's been brilliant, De Bruyne has been amazing, Odegaard's been playing out of his skin, and yet they're only just ahead of Salah, who's had no penalties all season. So my kind of thinking is, what if we do get that Salah of old? What if Liverpool start getting some penalties? Suddenly he will be worth the money. It all comes down to your own team. I don't feel like I need the Salah money. I would be more looking to downgrade Fernandes and use that money elsewhere before I sell Salah. And also, I think the fixtures are looking pretty good. Like, decent enough for goals anyway. And Salah's underlying numbers, so expected goals, expected assists, they are down on last year, a bit like Trent, but they are also very, very good still compared to lots of other players. And they're quite similar to other seasons he's had where he's absolutely smashed it. So his goal threat is still really high. It's just over 0.5 XG per 90. He's a little bit creative, 0.2 expected assist per 90. And he has penalties if Liverpool could actually get one. And you know he's nailed on as well. So as much as there might be loads of reasons to get rid of him, there's also loads of reasons to keep him as well. And I just think, yes, we should scrutinise him a little bit more because of the money. But right now, money seems very easy to come by in FPL. And he's not that far off Odegaard, who's been amazing, right? De Bruyne has been great. Almiron, absolutely crazy season. And yet they're no more than 12 points ahead of a guy that's been awful. And I just think our expectations are so high of Salah, rightly so, because we know what he can do, that we forget that he is still just a good option. So again, if you need the money, you're sick of him, you're not going to captain him, absolutely go ahead and sell him. I just feel like he's that player that if you get rid of him and he scores, you're going to want him straight back. So be absolutely sure there's better ways to spend the money. And to be fair, there's lots of people ahead of me that haven't had Salah all season or sold him ages ago. I'm not saying it's a bad move. I just think there is that kind of argument that there are good reasons to keep him as well as reasons to sell him. And I know what the comment section is going to be like, so maybe I just won't read it. Like I say, if you want to sell Salah, just sell him and be done with it. Okay, so can you discuss the pros and cons of a possible Game Week 25 free hit? And this is important because if you were going to use your free hit in 25, you wouldn't be as worried about bringing in players from Man United and Newcastle, etc. What I would say is that free hit will almost certainly be better used in a different game week because the amount of games that are going to be off in Game Week 25 is going to be quite low and we will have transfers to deal with it. If you're absolutely sure that you have to have triple Newcastle, triple Man United, and if they blank, you want to keep hold of them, you don't want to use transfers on them, maybe you could make a little bit of a justification to use it, but I just don't think that those players from those two teams are so good that you can't just bench 3 and get rid of the other 3 and have 11 players playing out anyway. There will be bigger blank game weeks, so more teams missing out, and even if you can get through those blank game weeks just by using transfers and you don't need the free hit, you could then save that for a different week, possibly like a double game week, for example. There's loads of different ways to use the free hit, and as we always say, or as I always say, it's not just about the points you get with the free hit in the game week you get it, it's also about the points you can gain outside of that. So if there's a bigger blank coming up, and yes, there might be a bunch of players in that game week that are playing that you don't really want, well, that's a good reason to use the free hit because you only have to have them for 1 week, hope that they do something, and you don't have to sacrifice your better players either side of that kind of game week. So the pros are that a lot of people aren't going to use it that week, like a lot of people aren't going to use it, and you might be able to get some extra points. But the con is I think you'll definitely lose out on points in the long run. I just think that, yes, Man United players look good right now. Yes, they might have a double in 22, but they're not absolutely essential. Like Rashford's good value, Shaw's good value, but outside of that, you don't really need to be kind of tripled up long term, and you could get rid of one of those other 2 players and then bring them back if you needed to later on. So yeah, I will, unless things majorly change, there is no chance of me using the free hit in Game Week 25. So lots of people have got this dilemma. Who would you play this week, Kepa or Ward? So Kepa has got Liverpool away and then Ward has got Brighton at home. For what it's worth, I think there's probably a good chance that both of these teams concede, but I would probably just play Ward because he's got the easier fixture on paper. I know it doesn't always work out like that, but I'd rather play Brighton at home than Liverpool away. And of course, we all know that Salah is going to score this week because he's a great FPL option, right? Right? Okay, maybe it's just me. I don't know. So yeah, I'd probably play Ward. There's not a huge amount in it. If you've got a gut feeling either way, just go for that. I'll leave that one there. Give it a like if you enjoyed it. Hit subscribe, and I'll catch you again tomorrow.